And we're back once again with the PCC Multiverse. This is Gerald coming right back at you here again. Well, I'll tell you what, we are looking good for week 3 in the NFL. It's already started with a great game between the Browns and the Jets. Just so happy for the entire city of Cleveland that they finally got off the schneid. But let me ask you something. What is a schneid and how do we get off of it? That's something I've always wanted to know. But anyways, we'll get into that here in a sec. But it is something that we're going to deal with here in a minute when it comes to fantasy football and week 3 in the NFL. And who better to preview week 3 in the NFL but my good friend. He is the fantasy football guru of Pop Culture Cosmos. You got to check out his podcast, the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast. It's available today on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and over 30 different major outlets. It is my good friend, who I hope knows what a schneid is. It is Tyler Baker. Can you help me, man? Can you help me?
I have no schneiding idea what a schneid is, but I do know that it feels like Cleveland won the Super Bowl. The 1-1 Cleveland Browns. It feels like there's energy there. It's good.
Well, I'm great. Tell you what, it's all up from here. That's what I'll leave it with that. But yes, congratulations to them. But it is going to be a great weekend in the NFL for fantasy football owners. I know there's some things you want to talk about when it comes to certain injuries that you may be able to want to lean towards to or lean away from. Some people getting healthy, coming back into the lineup, and some people staying out that you think are probably going to be out for at least, for an extended period of time. So maybe some fantasy football owners need to make some changes. I think I want to start first in Jacksonville because I've heard some good news when it comes to Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, he was really close to playing last week. In fact, it looked like he was going to play last week, and then at the last minute, they decided not to roll with him because it's a hamstring injury, and anytime you have a hamstring injury, the worst thing you can do is aggravate it because then the healing time is going to get a lot longer. So they were cautious with him last week. It looks like he is going to play this week, and also T.J. Yeldon there is banged up. So I would say Leonard Fournette is a really good chance to play this week against the Tennessee defense that it isn't really scaring too many people.
So I have seen, and there's actually a lot of defenses that are out there that are not scaring a lot of people. One of those defenses is coming up Monday night in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh has been going through a little bit of turmoil. Antonio Brown is getting upset. There's some finger pointing right and left. Defense has been getting like I said, the defense is getting pretty much drilled game in and game out. And who shall be and they're going to be going into a veritable lion's den, no pun intended, when they actually go into Tampa Bay to face the Fitzmagic, because the Fitzmagic is definitely back.
Yeah, and when you were talking about fledgling defenses, I couldn't tell which one you meant, Pittsburgh or Tampa Bay. But I think it's definitely Pittsburgh. They've gotten away from that stiff Dick LeBeau defense that just doesn't give you too much. Pittsburgh as an organization, I know it kind of looks like they might be falling apart, but let's just remember that this is one of the more stabler franchises. And while some of the Antonio Brown stuff, I think might have just been played up in the media spin and in the echo chamber there, I would expect him to come out and play well with Ben Roethlisberger, but they're going to have to overcome that defense that is more than likely going to give away a lot of points to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're just the Fitzmagic is back, and I don't know if the Pittsburgh defense is the one that's going to slow that down. So if you have pieces, honestly, if you have pieces of either one of these offenses, I would be playing them this week, and I think there could be a lot of fantasy points on Monday night.
I think it's going to be a great offensive show. I'm excited for it to say the least, because I think it's going to be a great matchup of of offenses. And getting back to our conversation from the previous week, although he didn't have 70 attempts, he has had 66 attempts, Ben Roethlisberger, in a game. So this was his second highest output. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So he might throw it 70 or more in this type of game if they run behind.
Yeah, let's hope. Kind of like what we talked about last week, getting back to a balanced offense and what they do well. Now, last week there was some game script issues that stopped James Conner from getting the ball. I would I'm willing to guess that they are probably going to try to have a more balanced approach, try to maybe control the clock a little bit better, and limit Tampa Bay's opportunities to, hit some of those 60-yard touchdowns to Deshaun Jackson.
Before we get into something that I want to talk about when it comes to Southern California per se, but I'll give a hint. I'll elaborate more on that a little bit later at the end here. Your thoughts on the weekend as a whole? What are some of the players that you think people need to target? Some information that you've come up with, and some team matchups that might be favorable. Because we've already seen some trends, like you said, some matchups that might be favorable for them to look out for this weekend.
hmm Well, we're going to see Carson Wentz back in action. That's a good thing. The bad thing is that offense is really banged up. I would expect Philadelphia hosts Indianapolis, and I would expect Carson Wentz to probably not get off to a really good start. So if you've been saving him, I don't know if this week is the week to play him. It just depends on who else you have at quarterback. But I would expect Zach Ertz to get peppered with a lot of targets on Sunday. Also, Corey Clement looks like he might be the guy there. Jay Ajayi is hurt. Darren Sproles does not look like he's going to play. So I would expect Clement, if Jay Ajayi doesn't play, to get a lot of work as well. They did sign Jordan Matthews again. I don't know how big of a fantasy impact Matthews is going to be, but I do know that that will probably, if he plays this weekend, it'll probably push Nelson Aguilar to the outside. And the reason why they got rid of Jordan Matthews is because they preferred Aguilar in the slot. So it'll be interesting to see what that juggle is. But all of that, I think, is null when Alshon Jeffrey comes back, and that should be next week, maybe one more week. They're being cautious with him, but what the Eagles are doing here is they're being cautious with both Wentz and Jeffrey, and they're not going to bring them back on the field until those guys are 100% healthy, ready to go. So I think Wentz is healthy, ready to go. I'm just not sure that that offense is going to be firing on all cylinders, missing so many important pieces.
Once again, it is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt podcast. Catch our full episodes of the Fantasy Football Paydirt podcast today. You can catch it on our Pop Culture Cosmos channel that's located on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many different podcast outlets. One thing I got to talk to you about before we head on out, my friend, we can also talk about some other things, maybe some tips and things of that nature. But before we head on out, one of the matchups I did want to make sure that we talk about before we get into it when it comes to week 3 in the NFL was the Battle of LA.
Yeah.
Yes, the battle of the two teams that can't fill their own stadium with their own fans out between the Rams and the Chargers, who, all jokes aside, are very good teams, and actually both of them could have some real playoff aspirations.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good fantasy options on both of these teams. I think the Chargers get slowed down a little bit this week. They haven't this year yet played a defense as good as the Rams. I do kind of like Austin Eckler. For the Chargers, the Rams in week 1 when they faced Oakland, it was Jalen Richard that got a lot of work. There was a lot of underneath stuff coming out of the backfield. And the Chargers have a really good talent in Eckler. So I would expect Eckler's stock to continue to go up this week, not to negate what Melvin Gordon's going to do, but I see a lot of opportunity. And I think it's going to be a really good football game. But if you have players on either one of these teams, it's really hard to sit them, especially some of those weapons that the Rams have. You almost have to play Cooper Kupp, in your wide receiver 3. Robert Woods, he's a tough one in that the consistency just isn't there, but the potential certainly is. Brandon Cooks is an every week starter. Todd Gurley's an every week starter. If you have Jared Goff, depending on your quarterback situation, he could start every week. And then there's the Chargers, and you could say a lot for that Chargers team as well. A little foggy there at receiver after Keenan Allen. Mike Williams, I think, is going to continue to come on. He's a nice big target for them, and they love throwing to him in the end zone. So if he's out on your waiver wire and maybe you have a bench spot to burn, you might want to pick up Mike Williams.
And as we all know, the Rams, I tell you what, they're loaded pretty much right at almost every position on both the offense and defense. They, to me, so far in the early going, look like the best team in the NFL.
I'm not going to argue at all with that. I think they are the best team in the NFL.
Wow, that was something that we can agree upon.
Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. Awesome indeed.
Well, they're just so good, and not just the talent of the personnel that they've assembled, but also the talent of the coaching. I mean, Wade Phillips on one side, Sean McVay on the other side. Yeah, yes, please.
And last but not least, I mean, is there anything that people need to go ahead and focus on this coming weekend? Obviously, if you have any questions out there, we want to let you know as well. You can always hit up Tyler Baker on the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast Facebook group. You can ask him questions there on lineup changes, trade requests, trades that you think you might want to make, waiver wire pickups. Just give him a snapshot of anything that you're looking at, and you go ahead and he'll give you an answer on that. I know there was some requests already on the Facebook group I saw today that I know he was going to answer, that he was answering with fans out there. So if you get a chance, Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast Facebook group, they will make sure, and along with him, but there's also over 200 individuals there that might also give you their opinions, so you can get a bounce off and get a great opinion on exactly what you need to do for your fantasy football team. But last thing I want to go into, my friend, is some things that you're looking at, some trends that you're looking at going into week 3, some things that you're looking at as far as maybe some subtle changes that people might want to consider making when it comes to the third weekend in the NFL.
Well, in Cincinnati, Joe Mixon's going to be out for a couple of weeks, so Giovanni Bernard is definitely the guy there. I think one of the biggest stories probably happened tonight with Tyrod Taylor playing one of the most miserable games I've ever seen him play. He attempted 14 passes and and pulled a measly 19 yards out of those 14 attempts. He unfortunately suffered concussion, but that opened the door for Baker Mayfield to come in, and Baker Mayfield lit it up. He played without fear. He played without hesitation. He showed great ability to avoid pressure and was completing passes down the field. I think as unfortunate as the injury is for Tyrod Taylor, I think the Cleveland Browns are starting to turn that corner. And we've been talking about them turning the corner, and I think that this is another really good arc for them. And I don't know how much of a fantasy asset Mayfield is going to be, but I know it does a lot of good for Jarvis Landry and also Antonio Callaway. If Antonio Callaway is available in your league, you need to go pick him up. He had 10 targets tonight. And now the Cleveland Browns have 10 days. They have a long week to prepare for week 4, knowing that Baker Mayfield is going to be under center. And we could see some good things from the 1-1-1 Cleveland Browns in week 4.
Definitely, but we will talk more about that on our Monday episode, plus as a Monday episode of the Pop Culture Cosmos show, in a little bit of more, I guess, in the segment that we have there. But for a really detailed breakdown of the fantasy football scene, check us out each week. It comes out either Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on the time zone that you're at. It comes out late Tuesday, early Wednesday on the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast, which is now a part of the Pop Culture Cosmos channel, which is going to be, like I said, you can catch it today on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so many other different outlets. My friend, it's going to be a great weekend in the NFL again. Thank goodness I'm not playing you.
I think a lot of people say that.
Yes. So far this season, you are definitely the hot man indeed when it comes to fantasy football. Again, if you have any questions, check it out today, the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast Facebook group, and our full episodes today. Tyler, just cannot thank you enough for being part of the show, part of the Fantasy Football Pater podcast, and of course, right here at the Pop Culture.